The sight of a golden retriever neutering 3 tiger cubs all the way up in the mountains of Middle America is something the group of hikers would not soon forget. The hikers had a lot of questions, but those would only be answered years later, when one of the hikers visited the now fully grown tiger cubs in the zoo, together with the dog who had raised them. And the truth about the poor tiger cubs shocked everybody working at the zoo. Nobody at the zoo really knew where the tiger cub had come from at the time, but how they reacted to seeing this previously unknown golden retriever showed them there was some important information being withheld from them. And when the zookeepers looked into the truth of these poor animals, they found out that they should have never been here in the first place. This golden retriever had done something truly special for them, but how they got into that position was heartbreaking. And it was all linked back to the owner of the zoo, who might have known more about this animal than he first let on. But how did the golden retriever come to take care of these tiger cubs? How did they react years later, and what was the zookeeping hiding from the world? But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The 3 hikers were very unsure about how to approach this very strange scene at first. They had already been on so many trips together but had never seen anything even close to this. But how could there be tigers around here? They were in the middle of America. The only tigers that you could encounter here were locked away in zoos. But as far as they could determine, that was not the case. And that would also explain why the golden retriever was apparently feeding these cubs now. Maybe something happened to the mother tiger and the dog had instinctively started to care for these poor babies. There were still a lot of questions unanswered about this situation, but the hikers knew one thing for sure: this dog was not looking good. These tiger cubs were probably draining the poor dog, and it was not like there was any food available for around her to build up her strength. And carrying these animals back down to the city was also not really an option. Who knows how they would react to being handled like that for a long time, and the last thing these hikers wanted was to put themselves in danger. Luckily, they had cell phone reception all the way out here and could make a call back to the city. After a quick Google search, they found the number of a local animal rescue organization to which they could explain their situation. When they told the phone operator about finding a golden retriever that was nursing 3 baby tigers all the way up in the mountains, the woman nearly hung up the phone instantly. The story was so unbelievable that you can't blame her for thinking it was a prank call. The hikers quickly discussed their position with the man, and when they determined that it was impossible to get to them by car, he promised them that he would get a helicopter ready for them in just a half hour. The dog had already taken on a more nervous position as the hikers approached it and seemed ready to flee or defend these puppies with its life at all times. How would it react to a helicopter suddenly coming out of the sky? And eventually they made a plan for the hikers to surround the dog, but keep a little bit of a distance. For both the animals and the hikers, it was an extremely nervous half hour. When they heard the helicopter coming, they saw that the dog was reacting to it, but it did not run away. 3 animal handlers came running up the mountain moments later, very well prepared for the catch they needed to make. The golden retriever was barking and showing his teeth as the men approached it, but they were not deterred and had the dog and the tiger cubs captured within seconds. The hikers helped them get the animals to the helicopter, but they themselves did not fit anymore. It was a couple hours walking back to the city, and they arrived at the rescue center early in the evening. The building was actually already closed to visitors, but of course, they made an exception for the hikers. There was actually already somebody waiting for them. The owner of a nearby zoo had gotten wind of the find of the 3 tiger cubs and had made his way over to the rescue center as quickly as possible. He clearly smelled an opportunity and already made a deal with the rescue center to buy the tiger cubs from them. This was not something a respected rescue center would normally do, but the amount of money the zoo owner was offering was too good to turn down. If they rejected the deal, then the rescue center would also not get the money they so desperately needed. And so they all took the bribe, and the zoo owner got his 3 new additions to the zoo. But luckily, this was not one of those places with small cages where the animals would be exploited, but now there was still the situation of the golden retriever who had been taking care of them. The zoo owner had no interest in taking him, and seeing as he did not have an owner, he would probably just end up in the shelter hoping to be adopted. One of the hikers, Mark, could simply not let that happen. He did not know how this dog had gotten herself into this strange situation, but Mark did know that he respected the hell out of this animal for sacrificing itself like that. It was not a difficult process at all. The animal shelter checked if the dog was even chipped so they could try and trace back its owner, but this was not the case. That meant that Mark could just take the dog home and did not even have to try and find any potential previous owner. The 3 tiger cubs were quickly being loaded into the zoo owner's truck, and everybody promised once again to never speak to anybody about the exchange. The golden retriever, whom Mark had named Meg, clearly had a hard time saying goodbye to the cubs. It had obviously bonded with the tiger cubs. When Mark managed to put the animal on a leash and started walking it home, the dog would not stop howling. Mark told her the whole story, and his wife, of course, did not believe a word he said. Luckily, Mark still had the pictures of the dog with lion cubs. his wife and baffled by the photographic evidence, but there was clearly no way around it. And what an amazing animal that was. On the road back, Mark told his wife Diddy the whole story again, but with a whole lot more detail, all while being continuously interrupted by the howling of Meg from the backseat. But what stood out most to Meg about the story was the actions of the zoo owner, and then it suddenly hit Mark and Diddy at the same time. The mother. The mother tiger should still be somewhere, unless somebody had brought tiger cubs that were just born into the country and just them somewhere in the mountains, which seemed as unlikely as could be. The mother tiger had to be somewhere in the mountains or somewhere in the mountains or somewhere in the city. Mark assumed that if she was free, however, she would have found her babies in the wild and that they did not need to be raised by Meg. So he predicted that she was somewhere in the city where she could not escape. But where could that possibly be? He could see that the call had come in from the outskirts of the city and gave Diddy the address. They now had a lead, and even though it was a small one, it would end up helping them a lot in finding out the truth. They went to the address the very same day. When they rang the doorbell, the couple had little expectation and the old man ended up opening the door, being extremely confused as to what they were doing here. And that surprise did not fade when they told him that they were here for the roar he had reported. He had called the police weeks ago and was told to keep an eye out and call if he heard it again. Out of nowhere, the dog seemed to react to something. It started barking and pulling in its leash as hard as possible, pulling Mark towards a large old building. But there was something inside the building that was getting the attention of Meg. It probably gave a look into the basement and Mark decided to take a peek inside. His eyes went wide when he saw what was down there, and suddenly things started to make so much more sense to him. He waved Diddy over and showed her what Meg had discovered. There were a lot of animals down there, and they were clearly not your average house pets. Her brother was completely stunned by the news, but immediately made sure he got a warrant based on the pictures Diddy sent him and assembled a force of 20 officers to raid the building. Meanwhile, Mark was connecting the animal sanctuary that had previously helped him with the tiger cubs. Officers were on the scene within the hour, and Diddy and Mark had waited the whole time. They had seen a little bit of human activity, but it was clear to them that whoever was in there had no idea they had been busted. They lined themselves up at all entrances, waiting for the signal, and then busted in, completely surprising the people running this place. Within just a couple of minutes, they had everybody inside in handcuffs, and sanctuary employees could get to the animals. Mark was right. It turned out that Mark had been right, and that this had been an organized smuggling ring that specialized in rare and valuable animals, which they could sell on the black market, and they did confirm that they used to have a tiger in their assortment as well. In fact, the tiger was pregnant. They were planning on selling the cubs for a very high price, but somehow the tiger escaped into the mountains just before it was set to give birth. And when they found it again and tranquilized it again, its uterus was already empty. They searched for a long time but could not find the cubs again. And seeing as the mother was no longer pregnant, the smugglers saw no reason to keep her. They quickly sold her onto the highest bidder, as she also started to make too much noise ever since she was captured again. So even though Mark had successfully managed to shut the smuggling ring down, he did not manage to find the mother of the tiger cubs, and now also knew that he would never be able to. And so he and Diddy simply had to accept that the cubs would stay at the zoo. They would probably be best off there. 3 years end up passing. Mark and Diddy pick up their life again, but now with their new roommate Meg. They are very happy together and have not thought about the tiger cubs for a while now. But when Meg starts to get old and more sick, they suddenly pop back into Mark's mind again. He thought that it would be a fun trip for Meg to go and visit the tigers in the zoo and see what had become of them. But when Meg got a whiff of the animals, the old dog immediately became very alert and started barking at the line as hard as possible. The zookeeper also heard the noise and came to check it out, but they were nowhere near as fast as the tigers. So when they noticed where the barking was coming from, they sprinted in Meg's direction as fast as they could. The sight of 3 tigers approaching you at full speed was one that Mark would not soon forget. Their habitat was closed off very well, but that did not stop the tigers from trying to get to Meg with everything they had. When the zookeepers arrived, they were stunned. In 3 years' time, they had never seen these animals behave anywhere close to this. Mark ended up telling the zookeepers the story that he had promised not to tell anybody, and even included his experience with the smuggling ring that sold the mother tiger. Mark was stunned by this revelation. It's correct, the mother of the tigers? That was not possible. He thought that they might have a tiger that acted like the mother or something, but apparently the zoo had the paperwork to prove it. Well, they all decided to go and pay the owner of the zoo a visit and demand an explanation. And from that moment, it did not take long before the truth came to light. Apparently, the zookeeper had known about the smuggling ring before and had wanted to buy the pregnant tiger from them. The zoo owner had known of the smugglers and also bought the mother tiger from them. Only when the tiger had given birth had been allowed to buy it for a zoo, and when he discovered that the sanctuary had found 3 tiger cubs, easily put 2 and 2 together. Those had to be the babies of the mother that he had just illegally purchased. Mark would end up reporting everything to the police, but the zoo owner got off lightly by just paying a large fine. Yes, he made an illegal purchase, but at least he treated the animals well and even reunited the mother and her cubs. And it was clear that they were relatively happy here.